I'm 36 now, but this happened when I was 19, maybe 20. At the time, I was living in Truro, Nova Scotia. I was stuck in that strange period after high school. I wasn't in university yet. I was working a miserable retail job. Most of the time, I just felt completely lost. I didn't really have many friends. My family lived in another province. I was lonely, and I guess I was searching for something. That's how I ended up finding this church. It wasn't one of those big traditional buildings. It was a community church that met in a rented hall. At first, it seemed perfect. Everyone was incredibly friendly. People smiled, hugged me, and invited me out for coffee right after my first service. For a moment, it felt like I had finally found a family. But after a few weeks, something started to feel strange. It's difficult to explain exactly why. The smiles seemed just a little too wide. They stayed on people's faces a little too long. And the way everyone agreed with the pastor felt unnatural. They would all nod at the same time. It felt less like a real community, and more like a group with rules I didn't fully understand. Honestly, it started to feel a little cult-like. Still, I kept going. I was lonely, and I didn't want to give up the only place where people seemed to notice me. Eventually, I joined one of their weekly Bible study groups. That's where I met Brandon and Martha. They were probably in their early 30s. They quickly started taking me under their wing. Martha was kind, although sometimes a bit intense about living a clean, proper life. But Brandon made me uncomfortable from the very beginning. He was Martha's husband. He was also one of the leaders in the group. There was something about the way he looked at me. It wasn't just quick glances. He would stare. I would be listening to the pastor speak and suddenly feel it. You know that feeling when someone is watching you? I would turn my head, and Brandon's eyes would be locked on me. And when I caught him staring, he didn't look away. He would just give me a slow, faint smile. It made my skin crawl. But I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. He was a respected church member after all. I was just the new person in the group. The Bible study group was really focused on confession. They called it sharing your burden so you could be set free. We would sit in a circle while everyone talked about their struggles. Each person would admit something they were dealing with. Eventually, it was my turn. I felt embarrassed, but I also wanted to change my life. So I opened up to them. I explained that I didn't have a drinking problem or anything like that, but I told them I felt lost. I admitted that I was spending most of my time and money at an underground all-ages music venue downtown. The place was called the Downstairs. It was basically a dark, dirty basement where punk and metal bands played. I told them I went there every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. I didn't even go for the music half the time. I just stood in the crowd because I couldn't stand being alone in my apartment. I admitted I felt guilty about it, like I was wasting my life in some dark basement. I told them I really wanted to stop. I said I needed help. Everyone in the group responded with support. They said they would pray for me. Martha gently placed her hand on my shoulder. She told me God had a better path waiting for me. But when I looked at Brandon, he had that same look again. It wasn't kind or supportive. It looked hungry, like he knew something. And then he smiled. A few weeks passed after that. I was honestly trying to change. I skipped a couple of weekends at the Downstairs. Then I heard that Martha was leaving for a 3-day women's retreat with the church. That Friday, I felt especially lonely. The urge to go somewhere and not sit alone in my apartment was overwhelming. Eventually, I gave in. I told myself that going just once wouldn't hurt anything, so I went back to the Downstairs. The place was completely packed that night. The music was so loud you could feel it vibrating in your teeth. I bought a soda and leaned against the back wall. I just stood there, watching the mosh pit. Part of me felt guilty for being there, but another part of me felt relieved just to be around people. Then I felt that same sensation again, that crawling feeling on the back of my skin, the exact same one I used to feel in church. I started scanning the crowd. My stomach immediately dropped. He was there, Brandon. He was standing near the sound booth watching me. He looked completely out of place. He wasn't dressed for a punk show at all. He was wearing the same kind of clean button-down shirt and slacks he always wore at church. And he was staring at me with that same unsettling smile. He noticed that I had seen him. Then he began walking toward me. He pushed his way through the crowd. I just stood there frozen. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. When he reached me, he leaned in close because the music was deafening. His mouth moved right next to my ear. "I knew I'd find you here," he said. His breath was warm and smelled strongly like peppermint. I instinctively tried to pull away from him. "What are you doing here, Brandon?" I asked. "I was worried about you," he replied. He didn't step back at all. Instead, he placed his hand on my arm. His fingers wrapped tightly around it. "This place isn't good for your soul," he said. "You know that." "I'm fine," I said, trying to pull my arm away. But he didn't let go. "You're not fine," he insisted. Then he began crowding closer to me. He used his body to slowly push me backward. Before I realized what was happening, he had moved me out of a main room. We were now in the narrow hallway that led to the bathrooms. People kept walking past us, but no one paid any attention. "You're all alone tonight," he said. "Martha isn't here." He said it like we were sharing a secret.
"I know," I replied quietly. My voice was starting to shake.
"I should go." "No," he said firmly. His hand slid from my arm up to my shoulder. His thumb started rubbing the side of my neck. "I'm here to help you," he whispered. "I can save you from this." He leaned even closer. His face was only a few inches from mine. "We should go somewhere quiet," he said. "We can pray together. Just you and me. My car is parked outside." I tried to push him away from me, but he was much stronger than I was. He forced me back against the wall. "Or we could go back to my place," he continued. "It's empty tonight. We could talk about your soul." He wasn't asking anymore. He was telling me what was going to happen. The way he said the word soul made me feel sick. He started guiding me toward the men's bathroom door. "Come on," he said quietly. "Just for a minute. Let's pray." Something inside me suddenly snapped. It was pure panic. I shoved him hard in the chest with both hands. He clearly didn't expect it. He stumbled backward into a couple of people passing by. For a second, he looked shocked. Then his face twisted into anger. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I turned around and ran. I pushed my way through the crowd. I rushed out the main door and onto the street. I ran all 10 blocks back to my apartment without looking behind me once. When I got inside, I locked the deadbolt. Then I pushed a chair under the doorknob. I sat in my kitchen, shaking for the rest of the night. I didn't go to church that Sunday. I was terrified. On Monday, I finally gathered the courage to call the pastor. I was crying so hard I could barely speak. I told him everything that happened. I explained how Brandon had followed me, how he cornered me, what he said to me, how he touched me, how he tried to push me into the bathroom and then suggested going to his empty house. There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, the pastor spoke.
"Brother Brandon?" he said slowly.
"Are you sure you understood him correctly?" He went on to explain that Brandon was a foundational member of the church. He described him as a good man. He said Brandon and Martha were pillars of their community. Then he added something that made my stomach drop. He said Brandon had already mentioned me to him. Apparently, Brandon told the pastor he was worried about me. He said he felt guided by God to go find me and help me leave that sinful place I kept returning to. I tried to explain again. I was practically shouting at this point. He wasn't trying to help me, I said. He was acting like a predator. I think you're overwhelmed, the pastor interrupted. He said I had already admitted struggling with dark environments. He suggested that maybe I was confused. Maybe I misunderstood Brandon's intentions. Or maybe I invited his attention somehow. He said those kinds of misunderstandings happen in places like that venue. I went completely numb hearing that. He didn't believe me at all. In fact, he was blaming me. I ended the call right there. I never went back to that church again. I never spoke to any of them after that day. But the most unsettling part happened about a month later. I was at a grocery store walking through the cereal aisle. I turned the corner, and there they were. Brandon and Martha were standing right there. Martha saw me first. She gave me the same bright church smile. Then she waved cheerfully. "We've missed you," she called out. Brandon stood beside her holding the shopping cart. He wasn't smiling. He was just staring at me. It was that same cold, empty, knowing stare. I didn't say a word. I simply dropped my basket on the floor. Then I turned around and walked straight out of the store. 6 months later, I moved away from Truro. Even now, I still think about that look he gave me. It wasn't a monster or a ghost. It was just a man. And everyone else was on his side. I tried to stay positive for my dad's sake. He had remarried, and I wanted to give it a real chance. So when Thanksgiving came around, I agreed to drive down. It was only about a 90-minute drive, so I planned to go there and back the same day. His new wife came with 2 sons, 13 and 18. I hadn't really spent much time with them before. When they got married, my dad suggested selling our childhood house and buying a bigger one for the blended family. He wanted a place where my sister and I would still have room when we visited, but she insisted they stay in his current house. She said it was in a good neighborhood, but the house itself was way too small. Later, we realized the truth the hard way. She simply didn't want us visiting. I arrived around mid-morning. The atmosphere inside the house felt tense and uncomfortable. I went into the kitchen and asked the classic Thanksgiving question, "What can I do to help?" Without even looking up, she snapped back that she didn't need any help. All right then. For the next few hours, I sat on the couch with my new stepbrothers. We watched the Thanksgiving parade on TV. They barely said anything and just stared at the screen. The whole situation felt painfully awkward. Around noon, she shouted from the kitchen for her older son to come carve the turkey. My dad stood up, trying to act like the host in his own house. "I'll do it, honey," he said. I watched as he started cutting into the turkey. He made the first slice and then stopped. "This isn't cooked," he said with a frown. "It's still pink inside." She immediately got defensive. "Well, then the oven must be broken." The oven was brand new. Dad had remodeled the entire kitchen the year before. Still, nobody argued. The turkey went back in the oven for another 30 minutes. Half an hour later, she called everyone back to the table. Dad picked up the knife again and cut into the turkey. He paused for a second and looked confused. "It's still not cooked," he said quietly. The inside was just as pink as before. She rolled her eyes and said the oven obviously wasn't heating right. Dad didn't argue with her. He just slid the turkey back into the oven again. Everyone went back to the living room and sat in silence. The parade had already ended, so the TV was just playing random holiday programs. The younger kid kept flipping through channels without saying a word. About another 40 minutes passed before she called us again. Dad walked back into the kitchen and checked the turkey one more time. he cut into the same spot again. Nothing had changed. It looked almost exactly the same as before. He turned the oven dial up higher and put the turkey back inside. At this point, it was getting ridiculous. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew something wasn't right. Another hour went by. The house smelled like turkey, but somehow it still wasn't ready. When Dad finally checked it again, the center was still pink. He just stood there staring at it for a moment. Then he quietly said we should probably order pizza. She got irritated and said he was being dramatic, but nobody else wanted to risk food poisoning. So Dad grabbed his phone and ordered a couple of large pizzas. We sat around the table eating pizza on Thanksgiving instead of turkey. Nobody talked much during dinner. The whole mood felt uncomfortable and forced. After we finished eating, I started getting ready to leave. It had already gotten dark outside. Dad walked me to the door and apologized under his breath. He said Thanksgiving next year would be better. I just nodded and told him it was fine. But the truth was, that dinner told me everything I needed to know about how things were going to be from then on. When we finally sat down to eat, the whole thing still felt wrong. Growing up, our family dinners were always a big deal. The table would be fully set, and drinks would already be poured. This time we sat down at a half-set table, and realized there wasn't anything to drink. She sighed loudly and stomped back into the kitchen. "What does everyone want?" she shouted over her shoulder. "Tea? Soda?" The whole situation was a mess. No one said grace. We just started passing the food around the table. I won't go into too much detail, but the meal was terrible. Most of the dishes were either cold food straight from cans or something strange nobody recognized. There was this orange mush that I ended up spitting into my napkin. It was rutabaga, apparently. The turkey had finally finished cooking, but it had absolutely no seasoning. Eating it felt like chewing on a dry sponge. But honestly, the food wasn't the worst part. The worst part was their manners. I watched in disbelief as my stepmother and her sons leaned all the way back in their chairs. They were balancing on the two back legs. These weren't ordinary chairs. They were antiques. My mom and I had found them at a garage sale years ago. We had refinished them together. They were wooden chairs with delicate cane seats. And now these people were treating them like cheap lawn furniture. One wrong lean, and they could have snapped them in half. All I could think about were the rules I grew up with. Napkin in your lap. Pass food instead of reaching across the table. Use basic manners. These people acted like animals. After everyone had pushed the awful food around their plates long enough, I looked around for the best part of Thanksgiving. "Is there pie?" I asked. My stepmother started clearing plates from the table. "I didn't make any dessert," she said. "No one really needs it anyway." At that point, I just wanted to leave. I poured myself a cup of coffee. While I was taking the last sip, she suddenly appeared beside me. "I'm sure you probably want to get back to school," she said. It didn't sound like a suggestion. It sounded like she was telling me to leave. You didn't have to hit me over the head with the message. I understood it perfectly. I said goodbye to my dad and hugged him. Then I got out of there. During the drive home, I felt hollow and angry, but mostly relieved that the day was over. I had been driving for about an hour and was already back in my own city when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but it had the same area code as my dad's town. "Hello?" I answered. A calm, professional voice spoke on the other end. "Is this the daughter of Robert Miller?" My stomach instantly turned to ice. "Yes," I said. "This is St. Mary's Hospital," the voice continued. "You need to come here immediately. Your father is in critical condition." I barely remember the drive back. All I really remember are the red and white lights at the emergency room entrance. I ran inside, shouting my dad's name. a nurse grabbed my arm and guided me into a small, sterile room. My dad was lying on the table. I arrived just in time to see the doctor stop performing CPR. He shook his head. My dad was gone. I think I collapsed. The nurse helped me sit down in a chair. "What happened?" I asked. "Was it a heart attack?" "The turkey?" The nurse looked at me with so much pity that it made my stomach twist. "No, honey," she said gently. "Your father was stabbed multiple times in the chest." My mind just stopped working. "Stabbed?" I said. "Where? How?" The nurse explained that he had been conscious for a few minutes when the ambulance brought him in. Someone had found him lying on the side of the road. But before he lost consciousness, he told them he had been sleeping in his bedroom when a man attacked him. He said he woke up in the hospital, sleeping in his bedroom. None of it made sense. He had been found on the road. Right then, the emergency room doors opened. My stepmother walked in. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even running. She looked irritated, like someone had called her in for a minor problem.
"Where were you?" I shouted, jumping to my feet.
She flinched slightly, finally showing some emotion. "What do you mean?" she asked.
"We got your call. We were out looking for him."
"What are you talking about?" She cleared her throat, and her voice suddenly sounded shaky. "Your father asked me to take a walk with him after dinner," she said. "We went outside, but then he just disappeared." We were searching everywhere. The nurse and I exchanged a quick look. Then I turned back toward my stepmother. My entire body was shaking with a cold I had never felt before. "He went for a walk?" I asked quietly. "That's strange." "Because the nurse just told me he said he was attacked in his bed." The color drained completely from her face. I had never seen that kind of fear on someone before. She knew in that moment that she had been caught. She never expected him to live long enough to say anything. The police were already on their way. Her story fell apart within minutes. There were no signs of forced entry at the house. When officers searched the master bedroom, they found blood stains under the mattress. There were more stains on the carpet. They also saw obvious signs that someone had tried to clean up blood in the bathroom. Under questioning, she quickly broke down. It hadn't been a random attack. It wasn't even a robbery. She had hired a homeless man to do it. The plan was simple. After I left, he was supposed to sneak into the house and kill my dad while he slept. In the morning, she would discover the body. She had promised the man $5,000. But everything went wrong. My dad fought back. The man panicked, stabbed him several times, and ran. Bleeding badly, my dad must have crawled or stumbled out of the house looking for help. That's where someone eventually found him on the road. Her motive was simple. My dad's company, his assets, his life insurance. She wanted all of it. She didn't want to wait, and she definitely didn't want him leaving anything to me or my sister. Looking back at that entire Thanksgiving now, everything makes sense. The terrible food, the tension, her rudeness. It had all been an act. She wasn't just a bad host. She was planning a murder. She had been pushing me out the door all evening. She was counting the minutes until I was gone, so she could start the real plan for the holiday. It was around 2 a.m. when we finally pulled into our driveway, after a long road trip to the Grand Canyon. My husband Tom, our 2 kids, Emily who's 10 and Jack who's 7, and I were completely exhausted. The kids had slept through most of the drive back from Arizona, but Tom and I had taken turns driving so we could make it home without stopping at another motel. Our dog, Buddy, a golden retriever we had left with a neighbor, was already back inside the house because she had dropped him off earlier that evening. She had texted us saying everything looked fine. The street was quiet, just a normal suburban neighborhood in Ohio. Rows of similar two-story houses with small yards and driveways. There wasn't a street light right in front of our house, so it was pretty dark, except for the motion light on our garage that flicked on when we pulled in. We started unloading right away, because we didn't want to deal with it in the morning. Tom opened the trunk of our SUV, and the kids grabbed their backpacks and smaller bags. I carried a couple of suitcases up to the porch to unlock the front door. Buddy must have heard us, because he started barking inside. At first, it was his usual excited yapping. Then it changed. He let out a low growl and scratched at the living room window overlooking the driveway. I was on the porch fumbling with the keys when I looked up. He was standing on his hind legs, paws on the sill, staring straight at the second-floor window. Our bedroom window, actually. I looked up too, and my heart skipped a beat. There was a shape at the window, just the outline of a person. It was backlit by the hallway light we had left on a timer. A dark silhouette, tall and still, like someone was watching us. I froze for a second, then whispered to Tom, "Tom, come look at the window." He was bent over the trunk, handing a bag to Emily, but he straightened and walked over to the porch. "What?" he asked, sounding annoyed and tired. "Up there," I pointed.
"In our bedroom window. See it?" He squinted, and I saw his face change.
"Yeah, what the hell?" The kids were still by the car, not paying attention. Buddy was barking louder now. We stood there for about 10 seconds, staring. The figure didn't move. It was creepy. Then Tom shrugged. "Probably that coat rack in the corner," he said. "You know, your winter jacket on it, lights hitting it weird from the hall." I thought about it. We do have a tall wooden coat stand in the bedroom near the window. I'd hung some things on it before we left. "Yeah, maybe," I said, feeling a little foolish. The angle from down here makes it look like a person. We both laughed, a nervous kind of laugh from being overtired. The kids called out, asking if they could go inside. I unlocked the door. Buddy rushed out to greet us, tail wagging, but he kept glancing toward the stairs. We brought in the bags and locked the car. We headed upstairs to bed. The house smelled normal, a little musty from being closed up. Nothing was out of place downstairs. When we got to the bedroom, I flipped on the light. I looked at the window. The coat rack was there, sure, but it didn't look like the silhouette from inside. It was off to the side, and the jackets weren't hanging high enough to match what we'd seen. Tom noticed too. "Huh? Doesn't look the same," he said. We peeked outside from upstairs. The driveway was empty, just our car. "Maybe it was a reflection or something," I said. But it still bugged me. We decided to check from the outside to be sure. Tom grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen. We stepped back onto the porch. The kids were already upstairs in their pajamas. I looked up at the window. Nothing. No shadow, no shape. The hallway light was on, but the window showed an empty room. "Okay, that's weird," Tom admitted. "You think someone was in there?" The thought hit me. We'd been gone 2 weeks. What if someone broke in?
Our neighbor had the key to feed Buddy, but she swore she hadn't been inside otherwise. We went back in and searched the house from top to bottom. Started with the basement, laundry, storage boxes, furnace. Nothing. Upstairs we checked closets, under beds, the attic. Kids' rooms were fine. Our room too. Bathroom cabinets, hallway, closet. Downstairs, kitchen, living room, garage. We even looked in the backyard shed. Door was locked like we had left it. Absolutely nothing. No footprints, no missing items, no signs of forced entry. All doors and windows were secure. By then it was almost 3:30 a.m. We were wiped out. "Probably our imagination," Tom said. "Long drive, tired eyes playing tricks. We never called the police. What would we say? We thought we saw a shadow. They'd think we were crazy. Nothing was stolen or damaged. We went to bed. Buddy curled up at the foot of the bed. I fell asleep quickly. Woke around 6 a.m. Heard something. A faint creak, like a floorboard upstairs. Our house is old, built in the 70s. It settles sometimes. I listened. It stopped. Tom was still asleep. The kids were asleep. I chalked it up to the house waking with the heat. The next day was normal. Unpacking, laundry, grocery run. But that evening, while making dinner, Buddy started growling. He stared at the basement door. He wouldn't go down when I tried to let him out. I opened the door. Nothing. Just the dim light from the bulb. I went down myself, flipped on the light, looked around. Empty. On the way back up, I noticed a small scuff on the wall near the stairs, like a shoe mark. Could have been from before. We have kids. Marks happen. That night I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about the silhouette. From outside, it had looked so human. Over the next few days, little things added up. Emily said her stuffed bear was on the wrong shelf. She swore she left it on her bed. Jack found one of his toy cars in the bathtub. He said he didn't put it there. Tom laughed, thinking the kids forgot. I wasn't so sure. In the kitchen, a glass fell from the cabinet, placed right on the edge like someone had moved it. We searched again, thoroughly, checked crawl space under the porch. Nothing. Even looked in the vents. Still nothing. A week later, things got worse. I was home alone one afternoon, kids at school, Tom at work. Heard footsteps upstairs. Clear as day, slow, deliberate, pacing in the bedroom. I grabbed a kitchen knife. Heart pounding, I crept up. Room empty. Coat rack moved closer to the window. I hadn't touched it. Tom hadn't touched it. That night I told Tom we needed cameras. He agreed, but we put it off. Money was tight after the vacation. We started locking interior doors, kept Buddy close. 2 nights ago, I woke to Buddy whining at the bedroom door. It was closed. I sat up, listened. A soft thump, like a drawer closing. Tom stirred. "Someone's in the house," I said. We both got up, searched. Kids' rooms asleep, bathroom empty, guest room, window unlocked. We always keep them latched. We haven't slept right since. Every noise makes me jump. The kids sense it, asking why we're so jumpy. We've thought about calling the police, but what proof do we have? No theft, no damage, just feelings. That shadow we saw. As I lay awake, I heard it again, breathing, faint from under the bed. I didn't look, couldn't. This morning, found a single sock in the laundry, men's size, plain black. Tom said maybe from the trip. I know our stuff. I don't know what's happening. Maybe someone squatted while we were gone. Maybe they're still here, watching. Or maybe it's all in my head. But that shadow was real. And whatever it was, it saw us first.
This happened when I was 19. At the time, I was working the night shift at a 24-hour gas station just outside a small highway town. It was the kind of place where nothing really happened. Most nights were painfully slow. A few truck drivers would stop for coffee. Sometimes someone would come in for cigarettes or snacks. But after about midnight, the place was usually empty. The station sat right off the interstate. Behind the building, there was nothing but a huge open field and a thin line of woods in the distance. The parking lot lights were bright enough to make the rest of the area look even darker. I worked alone most nights. My manager said it was safe because the town was small and quiet. For the first couple of months, it honestly felt that way.
Then one night something strange happened. It was around 2:30 in the morning. I was sitting behind the counter, half watching the small TV mounted on the wall. The store was completely empty. No cars at the pumps, no headlights coming down the road. Then the bell above the door rang. I looked up expecting to see someone walking in, but the door was closed. No one was there. At first I thought maybe the wind had pushed it open for a second, but when I looked at the glass, the door hadn't moved at all. I shrugged it off and went back to watching TV. About 10 minutes later, the bell rang again. This time I got up. I walked around the counter and checked the door. Still closed. Still no one outside. That's when I noticed something odd in the parking lot. There was a car sitting at the far edge of the lot near the field. The engine wasn't running. The headlights were off. But someone was definitely inside. I could see the faint outline of a person sitting in the driver's seat. They weren't moving. They were just sitting there, facing the building, watching the store. I stood there for a minute just staring out the window. The person in the car still hadn't moved. They were just sitting in the driver's seat facing the store. I told myself they were probably just resting or checking their phone. Truck drivers did that sometimes. So I went back behind the counter. A few minutes passed. Then the door suddenly opened. The bell rang again. A man stepped inside. He looked like he was in his 40s. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His hair was messy, like he had been driving for a long time. But the first thing I noticed was his expression. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry either. His face looked completely blank. He walked slowly through the store without saying anything. I gave the usual greeting. "Hey, how's it going?" He didn't answer. He just kept walking down one of the aisles. I watched him on the small security monitor behind the counter. He moved slowly along the shelves, but he didn't pick anything up. He didn't look at the products either. He just walked to the back of the store. Then he turned around and came back to the counter. For a second, I thought he was finally going to buy something, but instead he just stood there, right in front of me, staring. Not at the counter, not at the cigarettes behind me, at me. Up close, his eyes looked strange. They were wide open and unblinking. Finally, he spoke. "Do you work here alone?" His voice was quiet but very clear. Something about the question made my stomach tighten. "Yeah," I said carefully. "But my manager is in the back." That was a lie. There was no one else in the building. He stared at me for a few seconds. Then he slowly nodded. "Okay," he said. Then he turned around and walked out of the store. The bell rang again as the door closed. I watched through the window as he walked back across the parking lot. He got into the same car, but he didn't drive away. The car stayed there, right at the edge of the lot, facing the store. I tried to ignore the car, but every few minutes I caught myself looking out the window. It was still sitting there at the edge of the lot. About 15 minutes passed. Then the door opened again. The bell rang. The same man walked back into the store. He moved just as slowly as before. His expression was still completely blank. He walked straight to the counter again. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he spoke. "You said your manager is in the back?" "Yeah," I replied. He glanced toward the hallway that led to the storage room. Then he looked back at me. "Can I talk to him?" he asked. My stomach dropped. "He's busy right now," I said quickly. "What do you need?" The man didn't answer right away. He leaned slightly closer across the counter. "I just wanted to ask him something," he said. His eyes didn't leave my face. Then he asked another question. "What time do you close?" "We're open all night," I replied. He nodded slowly again. Then he stood there for a few more seconds without speaking. The silence felt heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, he turned around and walked out again. The bell rang as the door closed behind him. I watched him return to the car, but this time he didn't get in right away. He stopped beside the driver's door and looked back at the building, right at me through the glass. Then he got into the car. The engine started. The headlights finally turned on. For a moment, I thought he was leaving. But instead of driving away, he slowly pulled the car closer. He moved it across the parking lot. Then he parked right in front of the entrance. The engine kept running. I stared at the car. Something about the situation suddenly felt very wrong. I quickly reached under the counter and grabbed the phone. I pretended to dial while keeping my eyes on the car. About a minute later, the car finally started moving again. This time it drove toward the exit of a lot. It turned onto the highway and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for a long time, watching the empty road.
The rest of the shift passed without anything else happening. When my manager came in the next morning, I told him about the guy. He listened quietly. Then he asked me to come into the back office. He pulled up the security camera footage from the night before. We watched the recording together. The first time the bell rang, the door never opened. No one walked in. The camera showed the store exactly the way I remembered it, empty. But the bell still rang. Then the video jumped forward to the moment when the man first appeared inside the store. There was no footage of him entering the building. One frame, the aisle was empty. The next frame, he was already standing there. This happened when I was 22. At the time, I was working at a big retail store. It was one of those huge toy stores that always felt chaotic during the holidays. I worked the evening shift in the electronics and games section. Most nights were pretty normal. Parents came in looking for gifts. Kids ran through the aisles asking for toys they would probably never get. But the store also had a serious problem with shoplifting. Management warned us about it constantly. They told us never to confront anyone directly. If we suspected someone was stealing, we were supposed to call security. One night, about an hour before closing, I noticed two guys walking through the video game aisle. They looked like they were in their late 20s. Both of them were wearing big hooded jackets, even though it wasn't cold outside. They kept looking around instead of actually browsing the shelves. That's usually the first sign something is wrong in retail. I watched them for a few minutes while pretending to organize some game cases. Eventually, one of them grabbed a large box from the shelf. It was an expensive gaming console. Instead of bringing it to the counter, he handed it to the other guy. The second guy lifted his jacket slightly and slid the box underneath it. There was no way he was planning to pay for that. My heart started pounding. I knew I was supposed to call security, but security was at the other end of the store, and the guys were already heading toward the exit. Without really thinking, I followed them. They moved quickly through the aisles toward the front doors. Right before they reached the exit, I spoke up. "Hey, you need to pay for that," I said. Both of them stopped walking. They slowly turned around. For a second, the entire entrance area went silent. Then one of them smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. The guy with the smile took a step toward me. For a second, I thought he might actually hand the box back. Instead, he laughed. "Mind your business," he said. The other guy shifted the box under his jacket. They both started walking again toward the exit. My brain finally caught up with what I was supposed to do. I reached for the store phone at the front counter. "Security to the front," I said quickly. The two men heard me. They both stopped again. The one carrying the box suddenly dropped it on the floor. The loud crash echoed through the entrance area. Then he pulled something out from inside his jacket. At first, I thought it might be a knife, but it was worse. It was a metal baseball bat. My stomach instantly dropped. He swung it once through the air like he was warming up. "Call security again," he said. "I dare you."
The store suddenly felt a lot bigger and emptier than it had a minute earlier. A couple of customers near the registers quickly backed away. The guy took another step toward me. He raised the bat slightly. Then the front doors slid open. A security guard came jogging over from the other side of the store. He was older, maybe in his 50s. He looked at the bat and immediately slowed down. "Hey," the guard said carefully. "Let's all calm down." The guy with the bat laughed again. Then everything happened at once. The guard reached for his radio. The man suddenly swung the bat. The bat cut through the air with a loud crack. The security guard jumped back just in time. The swing missed him by a few inches. For a second, everyone froze. Then the second guy grabbed the console box off the floor again. "Let's go," he shouted. Both of them ran for the doors. The automatic doors slid open, and they bolted out into the parking lot. The guard didn't chase them. He was already on his radio calling the police. A few customers started talking all at once. Someone asked if anyone was hurt. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grab the counter to steady myself. Through the glass doors, I could see the two men sprinting across the parking lot. They jumped into a dark sedan parked near the front row. The engine started immediately. The car sped out of the lot and disappeared onto the main road. A few minutes later, the police arrived. They took statements from everyone who had seen what happened. I described both men as best as I could. What they were wearing, what the car looked like. The officer nodded while writing everything down. Then he asked one last question. "Did you notice anything unusual about them?" I thought about it for a moment. At first, I said no, but then something strange came back to me. When the man had stepped closer to me earlier, right before he pulled the bat out, I had noticed something on his neck, a tattoo. It was small and simple, just a black symbol. At the time, I hadn't really thought about it, but now that I remembered it clearly, it looked exactly like the same symbol that had been spray-painted on the back wall of the store 2 nights earlier. The graffiti we had all assumed was just random vandalism. The officer stopped writing for a second when I mentioned it. He looked up at me with a different expression now. "Can you draw the symbol?" he asked. I nodded slowly, because suddenly I realized something that made my stomach turn. That symbol hadn't just been on the wall behind the store. It had also been scratched into the metal frame of the employee entrance door. The door that only staff used. The door that someone would only know about if they had already been inside the building before. It wasn't a big deal. I stood there shaking, trying to sweep up the broken pieces with a broom Frank had handed me. "Ma'am, you can't take that. It's evidence or something," I said nervously. She pushed back. "But it's just sitting there, and we drove all the way here." Frank had to step in and tell her to leave before she finally walked off in a huff. After that, the store shut down the demo. They locked the SNES systems up tight. You had to get a manager just to open the case if you wanted to see one. Video game sales dipped for a little while, but people forgot fast. The holidays kept moving, and Black Friday got even crazier. People were fighting over Tickle Me Elmo, or whatever toy was popular that year. But for me, that day changed something. Seeing how quickly things got violent over a stupid game, watching people turn into animals for cheap plastic junk, that stayed with me. I quit once the season was over. I couldn't deal with the crowds anymore. Now I stay home on Black Friday. If I need something, I just order it online. There's no way I'm stepping into a store during that madness. People lose all humanity when there's a deal involved. They'll walk right past a bleeding man just to save a few dollars.
I used to work as a volunteer park guide in Colorado. Through the years, I've seen how dangerous the woods can be. People think the forest is peaceful and calm, but one wrong turn can make it your last. There's one story that still haunts me. The older rangers used to tell it to remind us how quickly the wilderness can swallow a person whole. It was about a boy named Jared Adado, a 3-year-old who vanished in 1999 while hiking with a group in the Roosevelt National Forest. What makes it terrifying is that it really happened, and to this day, no one truly knows what happened to him. It was the morning of October 2nd, 1999. The air was cold, the sky clear. The pine-covered hills stretched endlessly in every direction. Jared lived with his father, Alan, who ran a small lodge in the mountains. A group of church volunteers was staying there for the weekend. They decided to take a short hike that morning along the Big South Trail, a route that followed the river through the forest. Jared wanted to go with them. He was only 3, but he was energetic and full of life. His dad was hesitant, but finally agreed when the group promised to watch him and his sister closely. The hike wasn't long, maybe a few miles. They planned to be back before lunch. Alan watched his kids walk off down the dirt trail surrounded by trees. He had no idea it would be the last time he'd see his son alive. The group started their hike around 10 a.m. At first, everything was normal. The trail wound along the river, the sound of rushing water mixed with the crunch of boots on dry earth. Jared ran ahead, laughing, tossing pebbles into the water, chasing butterflies through patches of sunlight. It was a typical day in the woods. But then he ran a little farther, just out of sight around a bend. That's when everything changed. When the group turned the corner, he was gone. They called his name, thinking he might have hidden behind a bush or rock. No answer.
The forest was quiet except for the wind in the trees. At first, they thought he might have turned back to find his dad. But when they retraced their steps, they saw no sign of him. Panic set in. They searched for nearly an hour, shouting his name. Their voices echoed through the canyon. Finally, they rushed back to the lodge and told Alan. He grabbed his jacket and flashlight, sprinted up the trail, calling for his son. His voice broke through the forest over and over. By afternoon, the search had become massive. Local authorities, park rangers, volunteers, and helicopters joined in. Dogs were brought to track his scent. They lost it near a stream crossing. The weather turned colder. The forest seemed to close in as the sun set. The next morning, they found something strange. About half a mile from the main trail, small footprints in the snow, Jared's size. Nearby was a faint outline, like a child had lain down, arms and legs spread. The tracks led uphill and suddenly stopped. No drag marks, no signs of struggle, no blood. After that, the trail was gone. Searchers combed every inch for days. Helicopters circled overhead. Divers searched the nearby river. Hundreds of volunteers helped. But it was like the boy had vanished into thin air. Weeks passed, then months. Snow came. Eventually, the search ended. No one ever found his body. The case grew cold. For years, Alan refused to give up. He printed flyers, contacted reporters, searched every season when the snow melted, but the mountains gave him nothing. Then, 4 years later, in 2003, 2 hikers were climbing a steep hill about 5 miles from where Jared disappeared. Near a clump of fallen branches, one of them spotted a piece of blue fabric tangled in the brush. When they pulled it free, it was a child's fleece sweater. Lying nearby were small pants and tiny sneakers with a Disney Tarzan logo. They called the police immediately. When investigators arrived, the clothing was surprisingly clean,
almost untouched by time. The shoes looked new, as if just placed there. Scattered a little higher up the hill were bone fragments, a small molar tooth, part of a skull. DNA testing confirmed it was Jared. But even with this discovery, nothing made sense.
The remains were found 500 feet up a steep, rocky slope, nearly impossible for a toddler to climb. No animal tracks, no bite marks. The clothes showed no tears or weather damage. Experts said a mountain lion could have carried him, but they usually dragged prey downhill, not up. Others said he wandered there himself, equally impossible. The official explanation? Death by exposure. Even investigators admitted privately the evidence didn't add up. His shoes were too clean, his clothes too fresh. The forest held him for years, then suddenly gave back only part of him. Years later, I hiked the same area during ranger training. Standing there, I felt the weight of silence. You could hear the river in the distance, the faint sound of wind brushing through the pines. Peaceful, but heavy. I tried to imagine what it was like for that little boy. Alone, trees towering overhead, air getting colder, sun slipping behind the ridge. He might have followed the sound of the water, thinking it would lead him home. But deeper in, everything looks the same. Every tree, every rock, every shadow blends. Then night comes. Temperature drops below freezing. The forest goes silent. You can't see the trail. You can't tell which way is out. You just sit, hoping someone finds you before it's too late. That's what chills me most about his story. No monster, no ghost, no strange force. Just the forest itself. Cold, quiet, endless. It doesn't care if you're 3 or 30. Once you're lost, you're gone. Alan never stopped talking about his son. He said what hurt most wasn't the loss. It was not knowing. The forest had taken his boy, gave back only a few fragments. The rest stayed hidden forever.
Whenever I guide hikers now, I tell them about Jared. I don't use his name anymore. I tell them about a little boy who walked ahead of his group one fall morning and never came back. I tell them how search teams found only footprints that stopped in the snow, how his sweater appeared years later, looking brand new. Then I tell them this: the forest doesn't lose people, it keeps them.